times of injury, times of major surgery, times of relative performance decrements, so if you're choking or slumping, if you will. And then transitions in sport are really high risk times for mental health symptoms too. So, you know, lo and behold, we're experiencing a major transition in sport right now with this unanticipated break from sport, if you will. You know, other transitions include things like going from lower levels of competition to becoming professional, Olympic, etc., or times of retirement from sport. There actually are a fair number of athletes who are experiencing this COVID-19 situation as unanticipated retirement because they were going to retire with the Olympics and really don't necessarily have it in them or have the life opportunity to extend that another year for whatever reason. Maybe it's pursuing various career opportunities outside of sport or starting a family or whatever. And so suddenly to be confronted with unanticipated retirement is a really big deal too.
How do you deal with that then, Dr. Claudia? This anticipated energy that's come along that potentially could trigger a whole host of really serious emotions. We've spoken about the entourage, we've spoken about putting plans in place, but for some people, the sheer motivation to get up and get out of bed to train might be a big deal, and when you've entered that space, how do you slowly climb your way back up and out?
Yeah, so when you enter that sort of dark space of, anxiety or just depression, if you will, not really enjoying stuff, not looking forward to things, the future does not look hopeful to you, how can you take the first steps to get going and get back into things? Human beings thrive on routine. And I think pre-pandemic, a lot of us, and certainly athletes, were used to quite a bit of routine, probably more routine than they necessarily even would have wanted with being very overscheduled at times. But, very regular workouts, team meetings, rigid adherence to meals, all this sort of thing. And now we're all sort of locked up at home. And there's a sense of, it actually doesn't matter when I get up and out of bed. It doesn't matter if I change out of my pajamas. Maybe I'm only cooking for myself, so why in the world would I bother, making healthy meals anymore, especially if my next major athletic competition is 1+ years away. And so you can see how easy it is, this vicious cycle, this downward trend of just more and more self-cares falling by the wayside. And that is a recipe for depression, anxiety, and just generally not feeling your best. So, one of the best ways to climb out of that is to get back to that place of self-care and I am worth it. And even if no one will see the fact that I'm not wearing my pajamas all day, it does matter. And it changes your psychology in terms of feeling like I'm getting up and doing something with my day. I'm being productive. I'm doing the things I need to do on a daily basis to feel my best and to prepare for whatever life has to offer me next.
And I really like that. I like the element of routine because every single athlete knows that routine is absolutely key, especially when it comes down to training and you're trying to fit everything in. You might be a student athlete, you may be a full-time working athlete, you may be, a mother with trying to work full-time and train full-time. So I understand that about the routine. What I do want to speak about, Dr. Claudia, is access to support. Not everybody has the access. Not everybody is privileged enough to be able to speak to a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a mind mentor, if it were. How do you go around that? How do you negotiate that when you just don't have the physical support?
Absolutely right. It'd be all too easy for me to just say, well, consult your local sports psychiatrist and they'll be right there to help you with an appointment, later today. Yeah, that is so obviously far from the truth in a lot of, I'd say most locations. We're working on that issue, destigmatization, et cetera, but certainly it's still not the norm. The IOC, importantly and wonderfully, is working on, the ability to get athletes who are really struggling, referred to resources, and if there's nothing available locally, to have telephonic access. It's, still a work in progress. But at this time, there certainly are online resources that are increasingly available, even free, for people to use. So online cognitive behavioral therapy kinds of resources, online mindfulness and meditation resources that can be really helpful. So some of that self-help can actually go pretty far. So, I mean, you can easily find reputable online tutorials in basic principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. And you can easily undertake on your own mood journaling, where you basically can keep track of what some of your automatic negative thoughts, if you will, might be during this time of the pandemic. And when am I having those thoughts? What are they? Let me write them down. And then let me write down a column for how I can reframe some of that negative thinking to change that to a positive automatic response to whatever the stressful situation around me is. Obviously, I'm speaking in quite oversimplified terms, but those are some of the simple things that we can all do on our own.
One thing you mentioned in there was meditation and mindfulness. Really, really powerful, and something that a lot of athletes have been doing, especially in the last few years. But there will be athletes listening into this webinar who are not aware of the mindfulness. So could you just give us a little bit of a taste in terms of what that is, what that can do to really help drive performance and mood?
Absolutely. So, you know, with the stress of the busyness of the world around us, our brains and minds can just sort of be all over the place, not aware of how we are feeling and doing in the present moment, and just really not able to focus on the task in front of us because we are so scattered. So whether that task is 100 meters to be run before us or the tennis serve to be, you know, made, etc. So mindfulness is all about sort of non-judgmental appreciation of and attention to the present moment, typically using all of your senses. So what you're seeing, feeling, hearing, touching, etc., to really help ground you in that present moment. And you can easily find a lot of simple free sort of mindfulness exercises online that can be a good introduction to that sort of activity.
Fantastic. I love mindfulness. It's a really good one. I've got two small children. One is 1 and one is 4. And I know that you also have small children as well. And you just need a bit of peace and still and just general calm to really center yourself, don't you? And I guess for athletes that are listening in that don't have children, but maybe you've got younger siblings or relatives running around, we all know we just need that moment of calm just so we can go forward with our day. You've been really active, actually, guys. There's lots of questions. I'm just going to read some of the questions out that you sent ahead to Dr. Claudia. One of them was about individual athletes, like gymnasts, actually having a higher level of anxiety and depression. I know that you can't answer for all sports, but is that true? Is that something that you've heard of?
I really appreciate that question. Thanks for whoever asked that. So there is increasing research on the difference between individual sports and team sport athletes in many facets, but including mental health. And specifically, what has been found is that individual sport athletes, that would include gymnasts, track and field athletes, and many others, for example, seem to be at disproportionately higher risk for depression and anxiety compared to team sport athletes. We don't 100% for sure know why that is, but there are several hypothesized reasons. So those include things like if you're an individual sport athlete running the 400-meter dash, for example, and you lose and you wanted to win, there's a sense of there's no one else to blame but me. I cannot disperse the blame for this loss on the rest of the team. I wasn't just, one of 20 people on the team. And by the way, 50% of people on the field lost because one team won and one team lost. I was hoping to win, or I was hoping to qualify for the Olympics and I didn't, and it's all on me. Of course, that is not, how, blame should be taken on, because that's not, the reality, but that is the perception that individual sport athletes may feel. There may be higher risks of injury in individual sport athletes, and interestingly, there may be something about the type of people who are drawn to individual sports with certain risk factors of, say, perfectionism or obsessiveness in certain ways that seem to be a setup for anxiety and depression. So it wasn't that the individual sport made them that way, but they were that way even before going into the sport. Now, on the flip side, individual sport athletes are relatively protected from substance use problems, things like addiction to alcohol and other drugs. Sport athletes are relatively more likely on average to suffer from those types of mental health problems. Again, these are gross oversimplifications. There are a million exceptions to these generalizations, but those are things that the research is finding at this point.
That's quite interesting, actually, because you say that the fact that you feel as an individual athlete this burden, this feeling of actually you are the one to blame completely. And we've spoken quite a lot about the entourage. How can the entourage really help the individual athlete offset that emotion? Because I guess the entourage are a big part of the performance, of course.
Yes, outstanding question. So the entourage is really well positioned to role model sort of resiliency, after loss, if you will, and to role model, non-black and white thinking, if you will. So, the individual sport athlete's response might be, I blew it. The whole season's done. Might as well go, heck, my whole career is over, because I lost out. There can be this very perfectionistic approach to things. And so it's important for the coach and others to really role model, okay, this is one roadblock. We're going to get beyond it. Remember, the big picture goals of where we're going, and this doesn't determine your ultimate overall fate in sport.
When you just described me, whenever I'd have a bad loss, that was me. I'd throw my spikes in the bin. I'd be like, I'm not doing this anymore. I was so dramatic.
Oh, yeah.
I get it. You need people to center you. So we've got some more questions here. Alida from the UK, she asks, what advice would you give to cope with losing performance confidence? So performance confidence, I guess, maybe not being match ready, match fit. What advice do you give to somebody to really regain that confidence again?
Yeah, so I think setting small incremental goals along the way that you can accomplish and therefore feel good about, and feel that you are taking those process steps on the way to your ultimate goal, even if you can't build confidence by participating in that major athletic event that you are anticipating, doing next weekend. You can still have these goals that can make you feel more confident, and important then to set up, some sort of stimulated, competitions, even if you're the only one there, but where you're doing time trials and other things as real world conditions that as closely mimic the real thing as you can, because that is going to build confidence in the sense of, yes, I can still perform.
So I guess that's like getting ready for match day, race day, having the right playlist, having the right uniform, the kits, just really trying to mimic a race day situation.
Exactly. And, the natural tendency is to avoid the anxiety-provoking race day situations if you can. So, I'm not actually going to time it, or I'm not going to have the coach watching virtually. And, we do that consciously or subconsciously, so it doesn't feel as stressful and as pressure-filled. But the end result then is you don't have that as big of a confidence boost if it doesn't as closely mimic, what you're going after.
Okay, that's great. We've got some more questions. Britt from Canada says, I'm the opposite of bored. The pandemic has me working more than ever. How do I deal with the guilt, the pressure, or fear of being left behind without training enough? So all of a sudden you feel like you're not doing enough. Like, how do you deal with that?
It's such a good point, and just really emphasizes that everyone is having such individualized experiences, emotional responses, time pressures. So, I would just say you're only human. You can do what you can to optimize your schedule and really sit down with a calendar and figure out where are the times in my day that I'm going to prioritize those things that are most important to us. And sometimes that is, illuminating in terms of figuring out where we might have pockets of time where we're spending time doing things that are not so value added when we, get down to it and think about the kinds of things that we want to be doing. But I think that understanding that most people are not experiencing ideal training situations right now. Most people are not having, coaches who are right there with them, making sure they're doing their, workouts. Most people don't have optimal training facilities right now. And you're right, there's so many competing time demands on a number of us. Some are bored, yes, and some are too busy. And neither of those is great. So that having too much isn't exactly conducive to, feeling highly motivated and feeling like you're doing, everything you can for sport either. So everyone is having their challenges.
Do you know, Dr. Claudia, when we were at the Athletes Forum last year, the mental health session that we did, the question and answers with the panel, was really popular. We could really see there was an appetite for people to understand more of it. And of course, you do a lot of work with the IOC on the mental health working group. How much of that touches on social media? Because just then when you said to me about having too much time, a lot of people find themselves online, maybe looking at what other people are doing and feeling that they're inadequate or not doing enough. Does that really have an effect on our mental health?
Yes, it does. So on the one hand, and I emphasized that earlier, that there's this importance of continued social connectivity, so that social distancing should not equate to social isolation. We need to continue to have contact with other people. And that can be by phone or video chats. Social media is one way as well to stay connected. But we have to make sure that we don't not exposing ourselves regularly to those kinds of things that lead to worse mental health. So pay attention to how you feel after exposure to certain sort of whatever Instagram accounts or whatever it is. And are you now increasingly comparing yourself to others in terms of sport-related things, body image, like all sorts of these different things? There's an increasing line of research, interestingly, that shows that athletes who have more social media time actually have higher rates of performance anxiety. So there seems to be more of a tendency to problematically compare yourself to others and to find yourself lacking. It's not necessarily true that you're lacking, but this perception of I am not as good or as prepared or as whatever as my opponent. And so there definitely is an argument to be made for avoiding some of that social media that's going to feed that negativity. And that seems to be the case, particularly for use of social media shortly before and even during competition, because a surprising amount of athletes are on social media during competitions. Depending on the sport, it's more or less possible, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I retired a few years ago, and I guess it was just before the boom of the Instagrams and the Twitters. Now when I see the athletes are on their phone during, that blows my mind, because I guess you'd think in competition you'd be focused. So for entourage that are watching this webinar and are maybe struggling with how they're telling their athletes to be on social media, what kind of tips do you have for them? I guess a phone ban is a little bit juvenile. You don't want to, take a phone off of a grown person. What kind of tips would you have for entourage who really want to put across to their athlete that that's probably not the best space for them?
Yeah, and you're right. An outright ban is probably not going to be well received by, adult athletes. So I wouldn't recommend that. But I think the fact is that most people, including athletes, understandably aren't aware of this research that shows the problematic effects. So I think, where the entourage are going to get buy-in from their athletes, understandably, are via emphasis of the fact that this is not going to necessarily be good for performance. Right, so we know that on average, people will have more performance anxiety if they are using more social media. So just, be careful with what types of social media you're using, when you're using it, proximate to competition, major training, etc., and how much, because, too much of anything is probably not good. So figuring out sort of a concrete amount that makes sense would seem reasonable.
Okay, let me ask some questions from the athlete community. This is a good one. What are the best suggestions and techniques for changing coaching practice and entourage culture surrounding mental health? And just to kind of develop that among your entourage, because some entourage may be a bit older, from a different generation, that don't quite understand mental health. And how do you really help them push forward with their own learning and development?
Yeah, that's a great question because, you know, depending on the country where you are, level of competition, athletes don't necessarily, coaches don't necessarily have any requirements for any sort of healthcare related training, let alone mental health training. So there can be lack of understanding, there can be a lot of stigma, there might be fear of even broaching the topic with athletes because, oh my goodness, I don't know what to say. If they say, yes, I am feeling bad, then what if I say something that makes it even worse? So coaches simply need to receive education. I mean, they don't innately know this stuff. So education on, you know, common mental health symptoms and disorders, and exact recommendations for what you can say to an athlete who may be suffering. So I find it very helpful to tell coaches, you know, it's okay to simply say to your athlete or ask your athlete, how are you doing? You seem a little down lately. And then if the athlete says, yes, I am feeling down, to simply offer the very humane, empathic response of, I'm really sorry to hear that. I'm sorry you're going through this. Think there's anything I can do that might help. See, that's not rocket science, but coaches don't even understandably necessarily have that language. I mean, they didn't exactly, you know, do a residency in psychiatry or go to medical school to learn this kind of stuff. Now, the IOC work group on mental health and elite athletes has recognized recently that, you know, it's all good and well for us to be disseminating resources on sort of the medical science of mental health symptoms and how doctors should treat these things. But yes, we do need to be educating the entourage too. And so the IOC is going to be offering diploma and certificate programs for all levels and members of the athlete entourage on the very topic of mental health and elite sport. So there's going to be online training from experts around the world in interactive formats, every topic you can think of related to athlete mental health. So it's really hopeful and promising and starting this fall.
That is fantastic. That is absolutely brilliant. And, you know, I'd implore you, if you are entourage watching in and you're a support staff of athletes or teams, that is a brilliant idea. And this goes on to the next question, actually, from Sean. He says, I work with a lot of high school pistol shooters, and they struggle to deal with competition stress. They also struggle with schoolwork and sports training. So this is about balance. How can he help them understand the balance between schoolwork and training, I guess, and competition stress?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think it's important for the entourage there to emphasize the importance of both of those roles, right? So that, you know, it's role modeled that, yes, it's very important to take school seriously and to put time and effort into that too. And to develop all aspects of your identity, because we don't want to, you know, just have you put time, effort, and attention into sport, because that's going to be problematic, especially during times of injury and retirement from sport, if that's all that, you know, that you had in your life at the time. So that's an important thing. And then role modeling, you know, as the entourage, role modeling the importance of balance and, you know, not making little statements like, well, you know, we can sacrifice sleep because, you know, there's only 24 hours in a day, so we don't really need to sleep. No, you know, for example, we know that if you get insufficient sleep, then you're, again, going to be at higher risk for injury. So really emphasizing and role modeling the importance of those kinds of self-care things too. And again, you're only human. You know, you can't put 24 hours into sport and 24 hours into school and, you know, perfect in every area of your life.
That is a great advice. Another question from Emil. He says, I'm training in combat sports. How can you substitute a partner whilst respecting social distancing? That's a great question. I don't know how you're going to do that, Neil, but I think Dr. Claudia might have some tips.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the so-called dummies that you can be tackling or whatever, depending on what the combat sport is, right? And so, yeah, not knowing those specifics, but I mean, you can probably find some helpful suggestions online in various athlete forums and different articles that you can find, because people are getting increasingly creative about how to simulate, you know, their usual training environments.
That's a great question. I'm just thinking, how would you pretend to, you know, be a judo fighter or karate or whatever sport you do, and you haven't got anyone to kick or to throw? That's a tough one.
It's really
This is from Rekha. She says, what advice would you give to a sports psychologist to convince an athlete to have the psychological training as well as the physical training? Because a lot of athletes deny they don't need it. They think they don't need it. They're strong enough in their mind. But if your entourage, you're trying to encourage them to open up on that side of training, what do you say to them?
Well, I can say that for those athletes for whom there is quite a bit of resistance to seeking out mental health treatment, we know that on average, you're far more likely to get buy-in if you emphasize the potential impact and benefit for sports performance. You need treatment because you're depressed. You need treatment because you're anxious. Your OCD is bad. You know, like your panic attacks need treatment. Those are stigma-laden sort of things on average for a lot of people. And so emphasizing that, hey, this is one part of the overall package for optimizing your sport performance. You're going to be less likely to be injured, and your performance could well improve if we address this as part of the overall package of your training.
Okay, so it's about buy-in. It's about making sure that athletes understand about performance. That's a good question, because I guess there are so many athletes across the world who genuinely feel that they're okay. You know, they wake up, they're motivated, they're strong in their mind, but there may be that extra 10% maybe with the mental health training and mind health that can get you to the optimal great performances. Okay, next question from Cindy in Canada. Cindy says, as a single mum with 3 children, I've been having the kids do all my workouts with me, but she's finding that the workouts are not as effective because she's trying to keep them on task. We would know what that's like, of course, don't we, Dr. Claudia? So there's complaining and lots of negativity from the kids. Do you have any suggestions on how to get the kids involved and make it an overall nicer experience for everybody?
Oh, well, more power to this athlete for, you know, doing what they can to, you know, still get the workouts in and involve their kids. What a great service that is to your kiddos. We know that children who grow up seeing their parents be healthy and physically active are just vastly more likely to be healthy in their life. So if nothing else, please take that kernel of gratitude with you for what you're doing for your kids. That's wonderful. So, you know, and Jeanette and I both having 4-year-olds, and I also have a 6-year-old, Jeanette is a 1-year-old. I think we can appreciate the challenge that comes with this. So, you know, I think if you can figure out when you're wanting to and needing to do the higher intensity parts of your workout that require just more focus and concentration and, you know, less sort of hand-holding of a 4-year-old while you're doing it, then, you know, are there things that really fully engage them and distract them? So I think of, like, what are my kids' favorite toys or, you know, treats or whatever it's going to take so you can get that, even if it's just 10 minutes or 5 minutes, right? That's better than nothing. So you do what you got to do to get that time that you need.
I love that. Tricks and treats. That's the main thing, guys. Tricks and treats. That will get you what you need from your kids when you need it. Oh my goodness. We should know. This has been really, really insightful. And I guess just to kind of wrap it up, what are your main takeaways for today, for the session, and for people who, or athletes that are watching the webinar, that, you know, the goalposts have been moved, we've got this extra 12 months, you know, what are the main things you think we should be considering to make sure that when the Olympics does come around next year in July, we're ready to go?
Yeah, I would just really underscore the fact that mental health is part and parcel of physical health. It can't be separated. In the past, it was, you know, separated, and really what an artificial distinction. I mean, this is, our brain is part of our body. It's not this like separate thing, right? And so we do have this unexpected period of time here. And it's sort of a fine balancing act, I think, between feeling like we can and should make the most of every second, you know, and optimize, you know, every part of our training. And, you know, we have to make sure we take full advantage of, you know, I have to use, you know, every opportunity to optimize not only my training, but now my mental aspects of things, and, you know, focus on optimization of nutrition, like while I'm homeschooling my kids. And, you know, it's, you know, so yes, take advantage of this unexpected time frame, but not to the point where, you know, the sense of needing to do that actually drives more anxiety, right? So do what we can to keep going, keep forward momentum, short-term goals, without sort of undue pressure on ourselves.
That's really good advice. Dr. Claudia, thank you so much. For everybody watching in, I know this has been an absolutely invaluable experience. We can do as much training as we need to as athletes, but mentally, if we're not ready and we're not healthy in our mind, we'll suffer. So that's some absolutely great advice. The next webinar, oh my gosh, we're flying through these. These have been fantastic. But our next webinar is in 2 weeks on the 30th of June. It is with two-time Olympic champion Ashton Eaton, amazing, over the decathlon. And he's now working at Intel with Rick Echevarria, the Vice President, General Manager of Intel's Olympic program. So I'm assuming that that is going to be about the transition. How do we become these amazing people after being fantastic athletes in our own field? So that's going to be a really good one about transitioning. Of course, something that Athlete365 is super duper passionate about. So make sure you tune in, register for that one on the 30th of June. That's at 5 o'clock Central European time. Ashton Eaton, absolute legend from the USA. So this now leaves me to say a massive thank you, Dr. Claudia, for your time and your effort on this early morning in Wisconsin, all the way out in the States. I hope it set your day up nicely. And for everybody watching from all over the world, we thank you so much, bid you farewell, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks' time.